Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 355 for February 6th, 2025. Hey everyone, Deanna Rubino here, joined by Zac Bowden for another exciting episode of the Windows Central Podcast. This week we got a bunch of things to talk about, including some updates to Windows 11, which, is kind of the central theme of this podcast, so it's good that we have news on it. But Zac will be going through some of the new features and things that will be arriving in the coming weeks and months for people, depending on what insider... Wait, are they called rings? They're not called rings in your channels, right?
They've been channels for about 4 years now.
Yeah. I still like calling them rings. But we'll go through those. We'll talk about Build 2025 briefly, as it's been announced. Some big news with ARM Holdings, that is, and Qualcomm regarding the lawsuit. Qualcomm released its earnings yesterday, and they had a couple of news bits coming out regarding their efforts for Windows PC. So we'll talk about that. Related, we'll also talk about how there always seems to be a lot of price cuts for Qualcomm laptops lately, which suggests some things. But at the same time, if you need a new laptop, it's probably a really good time to buy one. And then if we have time or can think of something, we'll talk about Thing of the Week. But Zac and I were just realizing we didn't really do anything exciting this week, so there's probably not much to share. Anyway, Zac, how are you doing today?
I'm not too bad. I've been head down this week writing a bunch of reviews of things that have fallen behind in my backlog. So I'm catching up, feeling productive, feeling pretty good. How are you?
Not too bad. Well, according to my Aura Ring, I'm doing really well.
So, oh, nice. Well done.
I got an 87 on my readiness score today. So I guess I'm feeling okay. And I just had some caffeine. So I'll probably go on rants, but we'll see. I will mention, though, for those who know that I've been using Aura Ring for many years now. I'm currently using the 3. I haven't upgraded to the 4, mostly just because there's not a ton of reason to update or upgrade. That said, I still want to because I really like Aura. But for those curious, Samsung is sending me their Samsung Galaxy Ring and their Galaxy Watch Ultra, which I'm going to be testing along with the S25 Ultra because some of the AI stuff ties into that. And I think it's kind of clever what they're doing. So I'm really interested to see how Aura Ring compares to Samsung Ring. Samsung's obviously the new guy in town here. So I don't expect it to be as good, but I'm curious as to how they do it. And it was funny because I was talking to Samsung and they gave me a little bit of a background briefing on this technology and stuff. And, I asked, does wearing both give you anything? And they're like, yeah, actually it does. Basically, it'll help save battery life. They get the system is smart enough that it can switch on between the two devices and save you battery life. They said I think you get about 30% more battery life because of it. It also learns kind of which one is better for certain things. And the data itself that's collected can be more accurate. I'm interested in just because when I go to the gym, I take off my Aura Ring and I would take off the Samsung Ring just because it doesn't feel great with weights. And you scratch it all up and stuff like that. But then it will fall back to the watch. And then some people, when they go to bed at night, really don't like wearing a watch. So then you could just go with the ring at night. So it's kind of cool stuff. I'll be sharing more with that hopefully next week if you guys are interested in those comparisons. But putting that aside, let's get to the Windows 11 news. Zac, you did a piece this week talking about 7 big features that are coming to Windows 11 that we should know about. And I'm sure there's some other little tidbits coming as well. So why don't you kick us off and tell us what to expect?
So this week I put out a video just sort of highlighting a bunch of stuff Microsoft is working on in regards to new features that are coming soon to Windows 11, we assume. At some point this year, a bunch of this stuff will show up in insider builds. Some of it has already been announced and is in testing, and some of it hasn't. So we'll go through the stuff that hasn't been announced because I think that's the more interesting stuff here. We'll start first with the start menu upgrades. So Microsoft has been building this for some time now. I think I remember hearing about this for the first time middle of last year. But they're sort of redesigning the apps list in the start menu. Right now, the Windows 11 start menu's app list is just a list. It's an alphabetical list, as its name implies. But they're working on 2 additional layouts in addition to the one that we currently have, which will give users options, I guess, and what UI they can have when they go into their all apps list. So the second option is a named grid view. Alphabetical grid view. So just like the list, except it's in a grid format. So alphabeticized as a grid. And then the third layout, which is much more interesting, is the categorized view, which appears to be using machine learning or AI, whatever Microsoft is planning to call it, to group your installed apps into certain groups within the apps list, cleaning up the apps list and making things ideally easier to find. Now, it looks like they're taking some serious, they're taking a page out of iOS's book here with its apps shelf, where if you scroll over to the app list on an iOS phone or even iPadOS, you don't get a traditional list of apps. You get grouped apps, and iOS does that for you. You can't edit those groups. They exist as they are, and apps get funneled into each bucket. It looks like Microsoft is working on the exact same thing for Windows 11. So you'd scroll over to your apps list and you'd have a bunch of different groups, such as utilities and tools, productivity, creativity, games, business, and other. And so all of your apps that you have installed on your PC, Windows will categorize them and throw them into one of those buckets. And so say if you have Adobe installed, like Photoshop or Premiere Pro, that would likely fall under creativity. If you have Office installed or Zoom or Slack, that would fall under productivity. If you have utilities such as Power Toys and stuff, that would obviously fall under utilities and tools. Any games would fall under games, etc., etc. So it's automatically grouping and bucketing your apps. And yeah, you can't edit the buckets by the looks of things. They appear to just exist as they are. Microsoft has a predetermined set of categories and will funnel the apps into those categories that it has made. And so that's quite interesting. And people were 50-50 on whether that's something they want or don't want. I can see why you would want to edit the categories, but then how would Windows know what category that is? Then again, UI AI exists. AI could figure it out if they really wanted to give it an AI boost. I don't think they're going to do that though. They're going to keep it as simple as possible, just like it is on iOS and iPadOS. Because
I was going to say, don't they kind of use the same kind of machine learning AI stuff in Edge to auto group tabs?
Maybe, yeah. I mean, this isn't new technology. The idea of just of automating a grouping process, I guess. So, yeah, we'll have to see. Because I mean, not all Windows apps also tell the system what kind of app it is. So there must be some level of machine learning going on or AI going on to identify the name of the app and then check it against a database, right? Because Windows itself doesn't have that database, and most apps don't tell Windows, hey, I'm a creative app, or hey, I'm a music app. It just sort of is the app. And so yeah, I guess we'll see how that comes to play. Like I said, this hasn't been announced yet, so this is one of those features that may never actually ship. I hope it does ship. It does seem pretty polished in the current builds. It is hidden. You can enable it using a third-party tool called Vive Tool. And once it is enabled, it does run relatively well, except for when it crashes. I couldn't get it working on one PC, just didn't want to run. But on another PC, it works absolutely fine. So that's probably why it hasn't been officially announced and put into testing just yet. In addition to that, we also have like the phone companion sidebar, which has been announced and it has been in testing for some time. It's still in testing. I think that will be rolling out very soon. And it basically puts your phone in a sidebar on the start menu, and you can quick jump into your messages, calls, and photos, as well as see recent activity such as most recent photos taken, messages received, etc., etc. And they're also adding a button to that menu which will allow you to send files directly to your phone with a couple of clicks. So you press the send files button, drag the file you want into the window that pops up, and it will be sent straight to your phone. Now, I know Dan is a huge fan of Phone Link and stuff. Have you seen this in testing yet? Have you tried it?
No, although, is it part of the Canary channel?
It's in dev. It's in dev and
dev.
beta at the very least.
Yeah. Okay, I think I'm in dev for my Surface Pro 11. I gotta check. So it might be on there, but I haven't really checked it. So it lives in the widgets profile.
It's part of Phone Link, but you might have to turn it on. If you go into Phone Link and go into settings, there might be a menu called Start Menu Personalization. Maybe you can turn it on in there. But once it's on, you will quite literally see when you open Start, there's a big sidebar that's added to it, which has your phone in there, and it shows you your battery percentage. So it's really quite handy. And they've also announced that they're adding support for iPhone as well. So if you're an iPhone user, you will soon be able to see some of your phone's information in that sidebar in the Start menu as well. I don't know how much less useful it is compared to the Android version. I know the iOS phones always have a little bit issue when it comes to Phone Link because Apple doesn't allow them to do too much. But yeah, we'll have to see, I guess. So that's the start menu stuff. I'm quite excited for the apps list. I know people were 50-50 on this. Some people hate the idea. They like, an alphabetized list, which totally fine. That's not going away. You'll be able to switch to that if you want to. The category view will be new. I don't know if it'll be default. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. Who knows? But that's something they're adding. And I'm guessing it's just to be part of the whole, Windows is becoming more AI-ified story that they sort of have to tell these days. Otherwise, the stockholders will be Mad.
I mean, doesn't iOS kind of do this
Yeah,
too
yeah. So
already?
it's iOS and
Yeah.
iPadOS base. It's basically a one-to-one copycat of what iOS and iPadOS
Yeah.
does. So yeah, and it's pretty cool. Right, up next, another unannounced feature, a new file sharing interface. This one's quite unique. I've not seen something like this before, but essentially they're adding, you know how in Windows 11, if you grab a window, that little snap bar sort of appears at the top of the screen. If you drag your window to the top of the screen, it reveals different snap layouts that you can initiate. They're doing a similar thing for file sharing. So when you're in File Explorer and you grab hold of a file, if you bring that file to the top of your screen, a little share menu will drop down and you can instantly drop the file into any app that can be shared to. So if you grab a photo, for example, and you bring it to the top of your screen, the little menu will pop down and it will show you different apps, such as social media apps that you can share the image to, or image editing apps that you can share the image to, such as Paint or Photoshop. So if I had an image, for example, that I quickly wanted to edit in Paint, for example, I could grab it in File Explorer, drag it to the top of my screen, and quickly drop it into Paint to open it in Paint. It's really cool. It's a really streamlined process of sharing files, and it's actually something that might make me use the sharing functionality in Windows. I don't know if I'm the only one who's like this, but I never use the share function in Windows. I don't think I've ever done it. I always manually go and find a file, and then I go and open the app I want to edit in, and then I drag it over that way. I never just right-click share to app. And I might be in the minority there. Dan, do you use the share menu at all?
Not as I try to. I do like
Yeah.
it, but now that I'm thinking about it, I mean, the stuff I mostly share would be like an image to a chat app, and usually there I'm kind of either copy pasting or probably dragging, dropping something. So I don't even use the feature that much, although probably more so on a laptop where I tend to do more mobile type work. So
Yeah. So yeah, that's another thing they're working on. I actually really do like this idea, and I'm hoping it will convince me to use the share function a lot more. Because once you grab a file, it does appear at the top of the menu. You just sort of, it hints that you can do something up here, so you just instinctively move your mouse up there to reveal the rest of the interface. It's pretty cool, and I'm excited to see that going to testing. Then they're also working on some updates to the taskbar. So I think we've talked about this in the last podcast or a recent podcast where they're adding the battery percentage to the battery icon, which is an addition that's been a long time coming. Every modern platform has that option. Windows is the last to get it. I'm glad it's finally getting it. I'm not one of those people who enables battery percentage on their phone or tablet or anything. I always leave it off because I'm convinced the battery lasts longer. I don't like seeing the number tick down, and so I never enable it. And I will not be enabling it on Windows either. So that's fun. Smaller taskbar icons. This is an interesting one. So they're adding an option to enable smaller taskbar icons. Now, this doesn't mean the taskbar itself gets smaller, at least not currently. Maybe they will change that. But in the current builds, the icons get smaller, but the taskbar stays the same. And the reason for this is because it's supposed to make the taskbar more dense in regards to how many apps you can have on the taskbar at one time. This feature will be super handy for PCs with smaller screens, where, such as the upcoming 11 to 12-inch Surface Pro and Surface laptop, maybe. But you'll be able to enable this feature. And so when you have the taskbar full of apps, if you add a few more apps, it will be able to shrink the icons to show those apps without putting them in an overflow menu. So that's a nice quality of life change, as well as adding the emoji button to the taskbar. I think we've also mentioned this one before, but they're looking to add the emoji button to the system tray. So when you're typing in a text field, the emoji button will pop up. And I think the reason they're looking to add this is because discoverability of the emoji panel is low. And the reason for that is it's hidden behind a keyboard shortcut. There's nowhere in the system that suggests that there's an emoji panel that you can access at any point. Even when you're typing into a text field, Windows doesn't hint at you that you can do that. You either have to know, someone has to teach you that it exists, right? And so I think they're adding a button to the system tray to make it so people start using it, because it's a great feature if you know about it. If you don't know about it, you're never going to know about it. And so this is a way to improve discoverability of the emoji panel. And of course, the emoji panel has a lot more in it than just emoji. It has Calmoji, it has GIFs, it has symbols, and it also has your clipboard history, which you can sync across PCs. And that's super handy if you're using that feature. But again, all of that is hidden behind this keyboard shortcut, which nobody knows about. And so hopefully this button on the taskbar will improve that. Right, let's move on to some of the features that have been announced. One of them being improvements to the lock screen. So these improvements are quite significant in my opinion. They've announced that they're going to let you customize the widgets that appear on the lock screen. Believe it or not, up until now, that wasn't the case. The widgets that appear on the lock screen were fixed as so. And so whatever was there, you couldn't change. You could turn off the widgets on the lock screen if you wanted to, but if you had widgets on the lock screen on, it was just a preset list of them that Microsoft had chosen for you. And so that was that, and that was strange. But now they're finally introducing the ability to customize not only what shows up there, but the layouts in which they show up as well. So you can remove widgets you don't want there, such as weather or your stocks, and you can add additional ones, even third-party ones that support this, to the lock screen as well. So in my example, I added the Spotify widget as well as a third-party battery meter. And so whenever I'm on the lock screen, I can see what my current battery health is like, which is really quite handy. And so they're finally letting you do that, and you can customize it in settings. You can rearrange the order of them and add additional ones, so you can have more than just 4 now, and they sort of paginate so you can scroll between them and stuff. So that's pretty handy and nice to see. And then, is there anything else here worthy of discussion? So yeah, and then of course we've got the recall, click to do, and AI and search stuff, which has already been announced, and that's expected to drop at some point in 2025 as well. I'm expecting that Copilot stuff, recall and click to do especially, to launch imminently in the next couple of months at least. I think they want to get it out before spring properly kicks off, and so, or early spring at the latest. AI and search, that might be a bit later. I don't know when exactly that's supposed to be, but AI and search is coming there. It's already in testing on Qualcomm PCs, and it will be rolling out to Intel and AMD Copilot Plus PCs in the coming weeks as well. So that's super interesting. So yeah, that was a look at some of the features that, some of which have been announced, some of them haven't, that Microsoft are currently working on for Windows 11. I think some of them are quite exciting. Dan, are you any particular thoughts on any of them specifically, or?
No.
Yeah.
I have, the recall on my Surface Pro 11. It works very well, but I haven't also used it a ton yet. So I think there's that question of, how useful it'll be. I still like it conceptually, but I think it's one of those, I'll use it on occasion. I've been finding, I do a lot of my work, of course, in the web browser. And with Edge, you can sync your history across your devices. And so I use that feature a lot, right? When you go into the history, you could see tabs recently open on other devices or something like that. So but I like the idea of recall. Whether or not it's worth the trade-off in terms of storage and processing remains to be seen. AI search, which I know you mentioned, is still coming as well. It's not something I use very often, but I think it's a really big deal since it's been such a weak point of Windows.
The AI and search feature, I think, will be most useful when you can't remember the specifics of a thing you were working on. Like if you're working in a document, you don't remember the name of it, but you remember the topic or the idea, you can just type that into Windows search and it will find it for you, which I think is really handy. Because it's the idea of using natural language for search, I think, is super important. And I think AI does enable that for Windows. So that's going to be super fun. Let's change tracks and talk about the insider builds that were released this week, because there were some interesting announcements in these builds. We'll start with the dev channel build, which is now actually rolling out to beta as well. So Microsoft announced this week that with build 26.120.3073, that build is now available to dev and beta for the first time. Up until now, the beta channel was stuck on 23H2. This is the first 24H2 based build for the beta channel. And that's significant because it means that they're planning to move the dev channel onto whatever is coming next shortly. And to my knowledge, what's next is Selenium, I believe it is. And Selenium will probably ship as 25H2 this year. I know I said previously that I think 25H2 would be an enablement package. I'm starting to backtrack on that. I think because of some requirements with Qualcomm's new processor, they might actually end up releasing Selenium as a new platform release for 25H2. And so we'll see how that goes, because obviously maybe that stuff can be backported to what's currently shipping on 24H2. I don't know, but I'm starting to lean more into the idea that 25H2 is a new platform release. And so we'll see how that goes there. But yes, they've announced that by the end of February, the dev channel will jump ahead to receiving updates with a higher build number. And once this happens, the opportunity to switch between these channels will close. So if you're currently in the dev channel and you don't want to test, I say more experimental, but I don't know if it will be more experimental. It might be slightly less stable for a temporary period. If that's the case, and obviously you kind of want to switch to the beta channel now because the dev channel will be moving on shortly. And so the beta channel is where you want to be if you want something relatively stable, but will have new features at the same time. So with that build, Microsoft did announce a new interesting feature for Paint. Paint is getting Copilot, or it's getting a Copilot button. And all this really is just a drop down for all the AI features Copilot already had, including co-creator, image creator, generative arrays, and remove background. I mean, we've talked about this before. Paint has become a really handy tool when it comes to AI features and functionality. In the last 2 years, Paint has been given a serious glow up. It has support for layers now. I believe it can handle transparent files. It never used to be able to do that, but it
Yes.
can now. Super awesome. You almost don't need Photoshop. It just needs a few more things for me, and then it can replace Photoshop entirely. It's not there just yet, but it's getting close. Obviously, if you're an actual serious Photoshop user, that's not true. But for me,
Yeah.
who uses Photoshop at a surface level, Paint's almost ready to replace it, and so I'm
Yeah, I was
excited.
gonna say the remove background feature is really kind of
Yeah,
impressive and
yeah.
useful.
Have you tried the blur background option in Photos? It's really good. The
No, I
AI it
haven't.
uses in there is really convincing for the most part. Obviously, sometimes it gets it wrong, but if you use it, it does a great job at identifying the subject in the foreground, and it does a great job at masking the background and blurring it as well. So yeah, definitely give it a try if you've not. Um, so yeah, that's the dev channel build. There was also a beta channel build which did introduce the lock screen stuff as I just talked about. So if you want to try it, you can. Unfortunately, though, they do say that they're only testing it in the European Economic Area currently, but it will be rolling out to other regions at some point in the near future. So it won't just be for the EEA; it will be for everyone. They just started rolling it out to EEA for some reason. And then the Canary channel also got a new build 27788, which introduced Windows MIDI Services Public Preview. Which is a complete rewrite of MIDI on Windows with a focus on a great experience for musicians and a strong foundation for future expansion and enhancement. This is interesting because I think it's fair to say most creators, especially musicians, choose Mac, right? If you're trying to create music, if you're an indie artist or someone trying to sort of get off the ground in regards to a music career, you're likely using a Mac, and you're probably using GarageBand or a program that runs on top of Mac. This seems like a play to try and get music artists, musicians to use Windows. And so MIDI, which Microsoft says was first released in 1983, is used to synchronize synthesizers and drum machines in almost all modern electronic music. It's used to record and play back note information, control stage lights and effects, keep mixers in their large venue in sync, and so much more. Although it is not itself audio, the MIDI protocol is essential to making music and was heavily used in the rise of hip-hop and other genres. So yeah, if you're a musician, give this a go. Maybe it will improve your music creating sessions on Windows. Who knows? But that's now in the dev channel, which is quite interesting. And they also announced, and this is also very interesting, is a handoff kind of feature. So they call this the ability to seamlessly resume OneDrive files in one click from your phone to PC. And they say they're gradually rolling out the ability to seamlessly resume working on OneDrive files from your phone, iOS and Android, on your Windows 11 PC with a single click. With this feature, you will get a notification asking if you want to pick up where you left off. I remember that phrase from the Cortana Windows Phone days. Pick up where you left off, editing a OneDrive file like a Word doc that you last viewed or edited on your phone within a 5-minute time window preceding unlocking your PC. Upon clicking on the notification, the same file that you were viewing or editing previously on your phone will open in your default browser on your PC. Interesting that it uses a browser and just doesn't open in Word. Why would it open in Word Online? That's an interesting choice. Maybe it's using an Edge backend to sync that information. I don't know. But that's interesting. Dan, what are your thoughts on that? This seems to be this must be like a phone link kind of feature, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the stuff you could argue is probably way overdue.
Yeah.
Smartphones became popular. I don't know. It wasn't last year. I just know that. It was definitely a long time ago. So some of it's reliant on better technologies like Bluetooth and improved Wi-Fi and connectivity, having 4G than 5G places. But, people do a lot on their phones these days, but you still need to work on a PC for bigger things. And so having those things sync and hand off between each other, is crucial. Now, we could make a really strong argument here that Microsoft wouldn't be doing this if they didn't, I don't know, kill off Windows Phone, right?
Yeah.
Windows Phone would have just had all this stuff built in natively, and would have been using this experience probably for years at this point already. But since it's not there, Microsoft now has to go into Android, which is obviously easier to work with than iOS, but to sort of backtrack and add these features. So it's better late than never. I think and they're doing it in such a way, we talked about this before with Phone Link, where the beauty of Phone Link is it doesn't require drivers or anything to be installed per se. Like you install the app on your phone, but that's about it. It doesn't make you go to a site and download and install a driver. There's very rarely a compatibility issue between the two. Although we were just joking, my S25 Ultra, the notifications don't work with Phone Link at the moment. So there apparently is there. But, they're doing it in such a way that it's like universal and it works across all devices without hiccups. So I think, bringing these features closer together, uh, especially if I think it benefits a company like Samsung, who is really trying to push like an ecosystem, right? They have their
Yeah.
phones, they have laptops, they got their wearables. Like the more those things can interoperate, the better. Samsung is doing a lot of heavy lifting, but if Microsoft can help on the back end too to make Windows a better partner for Samsung phones, I think that's great. Ideally, this would be a thing with Pixels too, but we know Google tends to be like not interested in working with Microsoft to make Windows any better with Android. Um, so we'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens there.
Yeah. So that's pretty much all of the Windows news of the week. So some interesting stuff on the way. I don't expect this to be the only interesting stuff coming to Windows 11 this year. I think we'll probably be hearing more about what's next for Windows 11 in the coming months. I know that they've got some new AI features planned for Copilot Plus PCs that will elevate them beyond what they already currently are, but that's a conversation for probably later in the spring. On the subject of spring, we should talk about Build. Microsoft has confirmed that Build 2025 is happening, and it's happening May 19th to the 22nd, if I remember rightly. I should have brought up the dates. I'm pretty sure it's the 19th to the 22nd. Monday through to Thursday, which does mean that there probably won't be a Surface event the day before, because I highly doubt that they're going to work on a Sunday to do that. And so if you were hoping for a repeat of last year where they announced new hardware the day before Build, that doesn't appear to be the case this time. Maybe they'll announce new hardware at Build. I don't think they will, though. I think those days are well and truly over. We say it every year, but it's definitely not happening at Build. I have heard that the smaller Surfaces that Microsoft are supposedly working on will be announced probably in April, so a little bit before Build, and so it's fine that Build starts on a Monday. So I wouldn't expect hardware at Build. We might hear more about those new AI features that I just hinted at Build. It would be nice to have a little bit of Windows time at Build for once, and especially with Copilot Plus. Then again, there's not really a developer story there, is there? Outside, actually, to be fair, it would be nice if they actually sat down and talked a bit more about the NPU on stage and showcased the power of the NPU with maybe this new AI stuff that I'm talking about, including Recall and Click to Do. Because Click to Do is a really cool idea. It's basically circle to search, but it would be cool if it was more useful. And so maybe Microsoft will talk a bit about how that's going to be done at Build. But yeah, Dan, if you got
I think that's
sorry, go on.
Yeah, that's an important thing regarding the NPU. There's definitely this idea out there, which is not wrong either, that the whole Copilot Plus and AI PC thing is just really kind of falling flat a bit. And it's not that it's an idea that won't eventually be true, because I think it will be, but there's clearly not a lot of core examples of the make an AI PC, right? The biggest one is blurring your background for phone, video calls, which is nice. And yeah, occasionally generative edit or something like that. But there aren't a lot of killer apps that are using the NPU. Even like Adobe apps, Adobe apps don't use the NPU, they use the GPU. And for them, that was a conscious decision. And that's one that I was told companies would make on an individual basis. Some will use a CPU, some will use an NPU, some will use a GPU based on their target market. So, for Adobe, they realize most people using their apps, our video and pro photo editors, are going to be using a device with a serious GPU in it, right? Because that's what you associate when you're not talking about gaming. That's the other thing you're talking about. So they're going to use the GPU because the GPU is going to be, with tensor cores, is way more powerful than the NPU. Nowhere near as efficient, but if you're on a desktop and you're doing video editing, you don't really care about saving power. So I think they really need to, even the Copilot stuff, like there's nothing with Copilot right now that uses an NPU, right?
Yeah.
And that's my kind of issue with Copilot. Like, I like Copilot a lot. I think Gemini is better in some ways. I've been using it on the S25 Ultra. It comes with like a free 6 months use of the Pro version. And it definitely does some things better. And the thing with Copilot, I just want to see it deeper integrated into the operating system and be able to just do more as an actual sort of assistant for the operating system. Because right now, that button, okay, you bring it up, yeah, you can bring up information. And I use it all the time for that. But it feels like really limited. And even just Copilot in general, we're talking about how they just haven't added really much stuff to it in the last couple of weeks. They did add the deeper search ability, we talked about last week, with where it can think through problems better and everything. So that's cool, but there's actually no features, right? Like if you remember, there used to be plugins for it, right? Like all that stuff is kind of gone.
Yeah.
And so is that ever going to come back? How's this stuff going to be actually more useful? It would be nice to see sort of a roadmap or tease, but we've talked about that before too, right? Microsoft kind of steers clear of doing roadmaps publicly because they know themselves they can rarely keep their own promises. So, but I think they need to really kind of show a real strong argument for AI PCs. And right now, it's a waiting game. We got to wait for all the software companies to make the software to make use of the hardware, but they're not going to do that until a lot of people buy the hardware, right? So it's a chicken egg problem.
Yeah.
So
I think Copilot itself needs to be extensible. To my knowledge, it doesn't currently have an API platform that Windows apps can tap into. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe because I know it had plugins. Maybe they're gone now, right? Is that what you were saying? The plugins have sort of disappeared, at least from the sort of consumer version of Copilot. And yeah, as from a Windows perspective, to my knowledge, there are no APIs that can talk to Copilot as an AI assistant anymore. Because if you remember the old Copilot, you could for a brief window you could use Copilot to control Windows settings, and then they took it away with the new Copilot. And so, I'm wondering if they're going to return to that, because I think it's important for things like click to do to become truly useful, or like that sort of idea. The idea that you can ask Copilot to complete a task for you based on what you've just been doing on Windows. That's currently not possible because Copilot isn't extensible. So click to do recall can't tap into it, and or vice versa, Copilot can't tap into click to do and recall to complete those tasks for you. And if Microsoft wants Copilot and AI to become ubiquitous and sort of just automatic, then that needs to be a thing that happens. The other thing I want to mention is Copilot Plus as a brand is really confusing in the current market of Windows PCs you can buy.
Sure.
Because Copilot Plus has nothing to do with Copilot. All of the Copilot Plus features are not Copilot things, like image generation, recall, click to do, AI and search. None of it's Copilot. It's all Windows stuff. It's separate. It's not even branded Copilot in Windows. So why they chose to call it Copilot Plus, I don't know. And then additionally, you can currently buy new AI PCs that aren't Copilot Plus capable, which means they will never, at least currently, of the current policies Microsoft has set for Windows, those PCs will never get these things like recall and AI and search, which really will make a big difference to your Windows user experience. Intel's Arrow Lake chips, which is their latest gen Intel Core Ultra stuff, to my knowledge, or a version of it anyway, doesn't have an NPU that's powerful enough for Copilot Plus. So they are not Copilot Plus capable chips. And so if you're buying an Arrow Lake PC, a brand new one in 2025, your PC will never, unless Microsoft changes their policies, like I said, never get Copilot Plus features. And that to me is crazy that Intel did Intel Lunar Lake and were like, okay, that's our Copilot Plus chip done. We'll go back to doing this over here, which isn't Copilot Plus at all. And that's nuts, because I mean, I've said it before, like I wouldn't buy a PC that isn't a Copilot Plus PC now. I don't see why you would limit yourself in that way in regards to, because I predict over time more and more features will be built to the Copilot Plus spec, which basically means it relies on an NPU of 40 plus tops. Let's be real, that's the only real system requirement there that matters, because a lot of PCs have 16 gig of RAM, a lot of PCs have 256 gig storage. But if your NPU can only output 11 tops, you're screwed. Even if you have a GPU, as Dan mentioned, that can output 600 tops, Copilot Plus doesn't care. And I do think that's stupid, and I do think that needs to change, because, there are modern PCs being built today and will be announced throughout the year that aren't Copilot Plus and will never be Copilot Plus as things currently stand. And that is really frustrating. So, hopefully at Build, Microsoft will maybe talk a bit more about its plans for Copilot and Copilot Plus, because it is a little bit confusing right now. And if you're a non-tech user and you're looking to buy a new laptop at this very moment, what does Copilot Plus mean? Like, why would you buy that? Like, why would you spend sometimes the extra money, or maybe not extra money, as we'll talk about later in the show? A lot of Snapdragon Copilot Plus PCs are actually relatively cheap these days, and that's good news for the end user. But the end user doesn't know why they should buy a Copilot Plus PC. Copilot Plus doesn't mean anything because it doesn't do anything currently. And then when it will do stuff with recall, it's like, okay, that's great, but then why can't this other PC that's way more powerful than my Copilot Plus PC do it as well? I'm currently using a 13th gen mini PC from B-Link, which can dock into a GPU, which can do a million tops, whatever it is. Won't ever get recall. It's really frustrating. It's like, why not? This PC can definitely run it, but it will never get recall, and that is the current predicament we live in. Right, that's probably it for build stuff. We'll obviously keep you updated when the sessions and stuff drop, so we can take a look and see if there will be anything interesting. It will most likely just be AI. It'll be AI and chatbots and and just Azure, some more Azure stuff probably. But yes, right, Dan, would you like to talk about ARM and Qualcomm? Because I know they've been butting heads over the last few months, but I believe there was news this week, right, in regards to that legal battle.
Yeah, so back before the Snapdragon processors that were designed by ex-Nuvia employees, if you remember. So step back, right? So it was Apple, and then some of the engineers who were building their chips split off, left the company, formed their own company called Nuvia. They were going to work on server chips that were based on the ARM architecture, or roughly, and then they're going to get away from it and build their own designs because those people were original chip designers. And so it was Nuvia, and Qualcomm came, talked to them, bought Nuvia for $1.4 billion, and completely shifted focus from server chips to laptop chips. And so they started designing their own processors for this task. It's what we now have as the Orion cores in the devices. And ARM Holdings, which is a company that all they do is design processors, but they don't make them. They just basically do the blueprints for them. And then companies like Qualcomm or MediaTek or Samsung or even Apple will come license that design, and then they can take it and they can modify it and do things to it. And there are two types of licenses, which I forgot the names of, but what ARM Holdings was accusing Qualcomm and specifically Nuvia of doing was that they said they had a contract with Nuvia and they had a contract with Qualcomm, and that the Nuvia contract still applied and Qualcomm was breaking it, I believe. And so they went to court, and they ARM wanted like an injunction against Qualcomm. So there's this threat that they were going to, one, block the sale of these new PCs before they came out. And then they came out, and then they were trying to get them removed from shelves, until this could be settled in the courts. And I think a lot of people in the industry, myself included, it looked more like a shakedown from ARM Holdings because, Qualcomm maintains that these chips are their own designs and they're not violating the current contracts that Qualcomm has. And it looked like ARM want to renegotiate, right? So if they had negotiated a contract with Nuvia and was for kind of less amount of money, Nuvia was smaller and all this kind of stuff, and that contract transfers to Qualcomm, you could see how ARM would be like, hey, we should renegotiate that because that's a whole different level now. And so it looked like they're trying to want to get more money from them. Qualcomm has been pretty clear that they, a couple of years ago when this stuff was first happening, they basically said, we're going to try to do everything with these Orion cores. And if it works out, that's what we're going to do. We're just going to go down that route. But if that fails, we reserve the right to still deal with ARM and make those chips. But Qualcomm wanted to get away from ARM because they kind of weren't moving fast enough. We know this because for all those years where you and I were like talking about Windows on ARM type PCs or Windows on Snapdragon ones, as Qualcomm would want us to call them, they didn't have great performance, right? That was the big thing. They were okay for light tasks, and if you're just an information worker, they were pretty good. But it was clear that a company like Apple was just, running miles ahead of where Qualcomm was. And it wasn't really Qualcomm's fault because Qualcomm, like I said, doesn't really design chips. They were licensing them from ARM, then modifying it, building it on the SoC. And Qualcomm eventually got sick of that. They're like, listen, we're trying to enter this laptop market, and all these designs you keep giving us don't do the things we need to do to compete here. And I think we all agree that was a big thing for up until literally last summer, right? when these new Snapdragon X chips started to hit the market. And so that's why Qualcomm decided to buy Nuvia and do their own chips. And as far as I know, and Nuvia's worked out, right? And the Orion core specifically, because they're putting that stuff into smartphones now, and they're putting into auto, they're putting into across all these devices, not just the laptops, right? And so I think ARM is getting a little paranoid or a little worried because obviously Qualcomm is a huge customer. And if the further Qualcomm moves away from ARM Holdings, that's, ARM, all they do is they don't sell anything outside of licenses, right? They don't make chips. So you have companies like Apple and, probably NVIDIA. All these companies are moving away to designing their own processors. Amazon does this. Google did this. Remember the Tensor Core chips or Tensor chips, whatever they call them. Everybody's moving away to make their own chips because they want to be in charge of their own destiny, right? They want to make chips that fit their hardware and their goals and not relying on someone else to sort of come out with the plans. So what happened now? They did have the court case. It was basically the charges, I believe, were the jury came back and said that that they were not guilty of let's see if I summarize it. Yeah, for the overall judgment was not a mistrial. Qualcomm won, quote, two important parts of the case, while the mistrial only applies to the claims against Nuvia. So they're trying to make claims against Nuvia, but because Nuvia no longer exists, there's really not much ARM can do here. So they went after Qualcomm, but then those cases were they were found not guilty, basically, won that. There was still an ability here for ARM to go after Qualcomm because they could appeal these cases and all that. Although the judge says, I don't recommend you try to appeal this because it's just going to go to, they're going to have to work it out, basically. They're not, like the judge did not see how ARM was going to win this. Let's see, here's the quote. After more than 9 hours of deliberation over 2 days, the 8-person jury in U.S. federal court could not reach a unanimous verdict on whether Nuvia, a startup that Qualcomm purchased, breached the terms of its license with ARM. But the jury found that Qualcomm did not breach Nuvia's license with ARM. The jury also found that Qualcomm's chips created using Nuvia technology, which have been central to Qualcomm's push in the personal computer market, are properly licensed under its own agreement with ARM, clearing the way for Qualcomm to continue selling them. So now what happened yesterday was with the earnings call from Qualcomm. Basically, Qualcomm said they talked to ARM, and ARM is not going to pursue this any further, which is really good news because it just means that there's no more court cases, basically. So the licensing agreement that they have in place is going to hold. They said, this was the quote from the earnings, the jury's verdict vindicated Qualcomm's CPU innovations and affirmed that Qualcomm's contract with ARM provides a license for Qualcomm products containing a proprietary Orion CPUs in industries such as smartphones, automotive, next-gen PCs, IoT, and data center. In addition, ARM recently notified us that it was withdrawing its October 22, 2024 notice of breach and indicated that it has no current plan to terminate the Qualcomm architecture license agreement, which is very good news. It means basically this is all over. I thought it was funny too, just because I remember when this was happening, not a lot, but there were people on my social feeds that were like, oh, Qualcomm's screwed. ARM's got to beat them. They're not going to be able to sell these laptops and it's all downhill. I'm like, I don't think Qualcomm's going to lose this. I think ARM is just trying to shake them down for money. And, I was right on that. I don't know what ARM's going to do. They keep trying to, they do reach out. Their PR reaches out to me all the time to do meetings at events like Mobile World Congress and CES. And I was pretty much open to them. But then we would go to these meetings and I'm like, we're Windows Central. We cover laptops and PCs. What you got? What are you doing? And it was just like, all they would do is talk about other stuff that they're working on and AI this. And it was like, I don't know what their PR outreach is even like. I don't know what the goal is. It's like, listen, are you guys making a chip that's going to compete with Qualcomm or design a chip that's going to compete with Qualcomm or not? Because if it's not, I have no need to talk to you. I don't care.
Because they don't make a product, do they? They make designs.
They just do blueprints, basically.
Yeah.
Being, a little bit facetious, but yeah, they don't make any chips themselves. They're strictly designers. In fact, one of the chief architects at Nuvia, who is now at Qualcomm, used to work for ARM Holdings and used to design their chips. There's a lot of bad blood here, right? Yeah. So you have someone from ARM Holdings who left and went to Apple to help design their own chip so they can get away from ARM and get better agreements, right? And then that person with a few others left and went to Qualcomm. And Apple was upset about that. Apple sued them too, saying that they're trying to poach employees and all this other kind of stuff. And there was bad blood there because, Apple was like, great, our genie's out of the bottle now. And then there was that whole thing like, oh, these guys are going to try to design a chip that beats Apple. And they keep saying that they're going to be able to do that. And a lot of people laughed at that. But whatever you think of Snapdragon X, it came out the gate swinging. Like, okay, it did beat the M3 in a lot of places, not the M4 right now. Apple still has a little bit of an advantage, but I mean, it was a monumental leap in performance from the previous ARM chips we were experiencing, right? And so I think it's just a matter of time before Qualcomm does jump ahead of Apple. And even if it doesn't matter, right? It's close enough, right?
Yeah.
These are really good chips. And because of that, we've seen a lot more adoption of ARM architecture, or ARM64 architecture by companies with their software. There's a lot more compatibility these days. And, it's just been really good. So we'll see. Qualcomm's going to, I think, continue to dominate here. Related to that, they did talk about how 10% of all PCs sold over $800 in the last, I think, quarter or whatever, like 10% of those were Qualcomm Snapdragon X based laptops.
That's good.
Which, yeah, I mean, you may think 10% is not a lot, but they were probably 1%.
Probably less.
Yeah, and that's like a big if, right? They were like almost nothing. To jump to 10% against AMD and Intel, who are very well established, makers here, I think is a really impressive number. And so, I don't know. We'll continue to watch this. I did mention NVIDIA. NVIDIA is rumored to be jumping into this game too. Probably, I'm sure we'll hear some of it this year, but I don't think we'll see the devices till 2026 maybe. But I think NVIDIA is going to enter the market too. I think they'll compete differently from Qualcomm. I think Qualcomm is trying to do the thinner lights a lot. I think NVIDIA is going to try to come from the gaming side, which is good. In fact, our own Richard Devine has been testing a Snapdragon X Plus laptop. One I have too. It's an Acer 14-inch AI PC. And he's been playing games on it. And, he's been getting really good results with things. I think it was like one of the Shadow of the Tomb Raider or whatever was getting like 50 frames per second. So that's on a Plus chip. That's not even the Elite, right? So the potential for ARM in gaming, which Apple has proved, or I should say ARM64, is there, right? And Snapdragon processors and GPUs are definitely capable. It just requires the software to kind of catch up in compatibility. It'll be interesting to watch, though.
Yeah, so. I found that Snapdragon X has made like middle of the road $700 laptops really interesting. Like I've just finished reviewing this Lenovo IdeaPad 5. It has a Snapdragon X Plus in it, 16 gigs of RAM, 1080p OLED screen. It's a 2-in-1, so touchscreen. It takes pen input and stuff. Oh, wow. You can get it with 1 terabyte storage. This laptop isn't anything special by any means, but at $750, 1080p OLED screen with the performance of a Snapdragon X Plus and battery life of a Snapdragon X Plus, this is great. It's for $750. It's incredible. Like good, like middle of the road laptops have suddenly gotten really good thanks to Snapdragon X in regards to performance and efficiency, and the fact that this has an OLED screen and a touch screen and stuff as well. It's just icing on the cake. I feel like a few years ago, you couldn't find a laptop in the $700 range that was OLED with pen
16
and touch,
gigs.
16 gigs of RAM. You couldn't do it. And with good performance and long battery life, you just couldn't get that combination. But now you can, and I think Qualcomm plays a massive part in making that possible.
Yeah, I mean, we know for a fact that every Qualcomm Snapdragon laptop ships with 16 gigs or more of RAM. That's the default, and that's part because they all have NPUs. So even a new Snapdragon X processor that was announced at CES, which is the real budget one, which we should start to see in $600 to $700 laptops, still has a 45 TOPS NPU in there. And so if you can buy a laptop for a $600 to $700, it's still going to have 16 gigs of RAM in it, which was a big complaint for a lot of people. And we saw this with Dell. They released the XPS 13 both with Intel and Qualcomm. And it was funny because the Qualcomm version was cheaper at 16 gigs of RAM than the Intel version at 8 gigs of RAM. And it was like, what? And then Intel eventually had to bump theirs to 16 gig just to sort of make it a little bit more even. But it's been forcing all those companies to make 16 gigs now the default. But yeah, I think, there's no fear for me in using a Snapdragon X, that base model in a laptop. Like I know that's going to perform much better than anything Intel and AMD has had for the last couple of years, while also getting very good battery life. We talked about we should be getting them in soon, by the way, the ZenBook A14, which was announced at CES and won our award for best laptop of CES. That's rumored to get 32 hours of video playback time. And it's around, I think, 20 hours of web browsing, which are crazy numbers. And I forgot who it was. I was watching a YouTube reviewer. He had a early version of it, so he couldn't benchmark stuff, but he did do a battery rundown test between it, a Mac, and I think some other Intel-based laptop, and he had to give up after 15 hours because it was like at 15 hours the other laptops were gone, and you still had 30% battery life left. Wow. And it's just like, so that's what I'm saying. Like even if like, all right, 32 hours video playback, that's absurd. No one actually just watches 32 hours or 20 hours of web browsing. Like even if they're fibbing and you're just getting 15 to 18 hours of like real world usage, that's insane for a laptop that's going to cost $899. And so we're entering a new era with this stuff. And yeah, a lot of it's because of Qualcomm. And the big thing we're learning too, and we'll be talking more about this in the coming weeks, is Qualcomm's new angle for attack, which is valid. This is something that bothers me, is that when their performance on battery versus being plugged into the wall is exactly the same. There's no throttling. But both Intel and AMD, and I wrote an article in 2021 about this, when you take those laptops off of AC power, they throttle. AMD was like, chips based on AMD were crazy. It's not necessarily AMD's fault. They would just say that they make the tools here, and OEMs set the barriers. But we've had AMD laptops where you'd unplug it, the CPU was throttled, the GPU was throttled, even the SSD was throttled. And we're not talking like 5%, we're talking 10 to 40% in terms of performance, meaning if you set it both in best performance for both categories, there was a massive drop in performance, which is so deceptive, right? Because it doesn't tell you when you're unplugging it and you're still in best performance that like, yeah, your best performance for battery that we set lower. Like it doesn't say that. But that's why I used to cringe when people are like, oh, AMD crushes Intel at battery life. Yeah, it's like, because those laptops don't get as much power to the chip when it's on battery. So of course it's going to get more battery life. Technically, I'm not even against this idea because I get it. You want more battery life, right? But at least they need to be more honest about it. But Qualcomm's like, we don't do that. Our chips don't do that at all. And they're accurate with that.
I was going to say, like, the point of the power profile is so that the user can choose the amount of power they have. If the balance profile should do that, I reckon. If you pull away from the wall, yeah, you should probably throttle slightly to increase battery life if you're on balance. But if you've got into settings to select best performance, you want best performance. So why AMD would throttle it is, well, OEMs would throttle it is a mystery. But I'm guessing it's because they knew AMD's chips weren't very efficient, and so it was like they had no choice.
Yeah, because then they get to say that it gets 12 hours of battery life or something like that. But even the Lunar Lake chips apparently do this. And again, like AMD and Intel will say, well, it's not our fault. We just give you the tools, and the OEMs, when they design the laptops, set the thermal profiles for these devices, and that's what they have that ability to do so. So then it's those laptop companies who are fibbing, the numbers to make things last longer. And a lot of reviewers, will just do benchmarks plugged in best performance, and then they just do battery life, and they're like, hey, look at that, it's not that bad. But they don't look at the fact that the performance of the chip is sometimes the GPU, and sometimes even the SSD is completely different.
Yeah.
So we're going to, in our reviews going forward, we are going to be testing all these things and putting both those numbers out there for people. I think it's super important. And this is a leg up again that Qualcomm has. And I think, sometimes companies pat themselves on the back and, like, Qualcomm was doing it for a while with the NPU and the 45 tops, right? But something like this actually is something to boast about, right? This is actually like a really big deal, in my opinion, when we're talking about laptops. The 45 tops thing, a little bit less so, but the fact that even on their $600 to $700 laptops will still have that same NPU as a $2,000 Copilot Plus PC, like that's awesome because that's really good for the ecosystem. So that when people buy enough of these things, we'll get mass adoption of that technology. So we'll see more software to take advantage of it. If that hardware just remained in like $1,200 laptops or more, which if this was an Intel AMD thing, is how they would start, right?
Yeah.
But Qualcomm's like, no, we're putting this stuff in all our chips. It's all gonna be the same. There's no compromises. I think that's really awesome. And because of that, of course, they have to have 16 gigs of RAM, which is, again, just great.
I'm really excited to see Snapdragon X come to desktops. I know that we've got our first mini PCs with Snapdragon X on the horizon from Lenovo, and I believe Ecom or Miniswarm, someone has another Qualcomm one on the way. I'm a bit annoyed that the Lenovo ones aren't Snapdragon X Elite. They're X Plus.
I know.
It's this odd choice, but it is what it is.
It is an odd choice.
But I'm waiting for the first all-in-one, like the next HP all-in-one or the next Lenovo all-in-one. I'm hoping has a Snapdragon X Elite option, or maybe they're probably waiting for X2 because I believe the rumor is X2 will have a higher tier than X Elite because X Elite is the current top end, right? But I think the goal with X2 is to have like a X Max. I don't know what they'll call it, but you know what I mean, like a step above, probably for more hungry form factors like desktops, and so maybe that's what OEMs are waiting for.
Yeah, well, I mean, you and I have been talking about that forever, right? That when Snapdragon X as a platform was announced and they had Elites come out, I was like, you have to understand they could scale this up or down. It's the whole point of it. So they can like just remove cores and just keep knocking it down. And that's what they've done, right? In fact, Snapdragon X actually doesn't remove cores. It still has the same amount of cores as Snapdragon X Plus, at least one of the SKUs. But they just has different clock rates and there's some other, the GPU is not as powerful now, right? But yeah, you're right. If they wanted to go beyond Snapdragon X Elite, which is right now at 12 cores, they can go to 14 cores, they can go 16 cores, they can go 18 cores. So it's technically no limit on what they can do to continuously improve the performance of this. So yeah, I don't know. I think, this ARM stuff has been, this Qualcomm stuff, Qualcomm powered. Qualcomm doesn't like when you call them ARM powered PCs because of everything we just talked about. They don't want to be associated with ARM holdings. Which I don't blame them. They spent $1 billion.
Apple doesn't say ARM either, do they? They just call them Apple Silicon. That's what they call them.
Yeah.
And Apple fans also call them Apple Silicon. So I don't
true.
see why we shouldn't call them Snapdragon, Windows Snapdragon laptops, because they are. Because, we don't, when we do refer to a laptop as Intel powered when it has an Intel chip, right? I don't know why we don't do the same with Snapdragon. We always say
I think
ARM
because
powered.
Snapdragon is 3 syllables.
Yeah, it's too long.
Intel, 2 syllables. Apple, 2 syllables.
Yeah.
Snapdragon, 3 syllables. It's just a little too long.
A bit too greedy, Qualcomm.
Qualcomm is a little bit better. It's 2 syllables.
Yeah, but if you notice,
Qualcomm powered.
Qualcomm doesn't use the Qualcomm brand in any end user or like consumer facing stuff. Qualcomm is like an enterprise brand, and they use Snapdragon as the actual front facing public brand, which is very interesting to me. I don't know why they've gone that way, but they have.
Maybe they just should call it Dragon. Dragon powered.
Oh, that's actually really cool.
Right? Dragon powered sounds badass.
They probably gonna get the trademark, I imagine.
Yeah. Can we trademark Dragon? I don't know. Anyway, I guess in speaking of this, we'll just segue quickly into Qualcomm laptops and big price cuts. We've been reporting for a few weeks and covering deals on these chips. And I think it's safe to say that although Qualcomm has, they reached 10%, I don't think they're selling as many as they kind of hoped either. We've seen a lot of steep discounts on these Qualcomm laptops, both from Samsung to Dell to Microsoft. They've, especially during the holiday season, which we expect, but even now, like there are some significant drops that are bringing these chips down and these laptops down to like $799, $850, where they were normally like $1,200 and everything, right? So I think there is a bit of a overstock on the shelves at this point. We know Qualcomm is also going to be gearing up for the next gen chip, which we do expect later this year. And so I think they want to kind of clear some stuff out. So I think there is a little bit of a, reality check here too for these chips. That said, if you're looking to get a really good laptop, I think now's a great time. The Samsung laptops with ARM are really, really nice.
Yeah.
I mean, just beautiful hardware. For people in the US, I would just say just go to Best Buy. You'll be able to see most of these in person, try them out yourself, check out the quality. The Lenovo one is super good too. Yoga Slim 9, no, Yoga Slim 7, I think it is. It's
7X.
Or Yoga Slim something.
Yeah.
It's a gorgeous laptop. Go check those out. Or if you want to wait till early Marchish, I believe actually, you should be able to see the Asus ZenBook A14 at Best Buy soon. But that'll be the $1,099 version, which has like 32 gigs of RAM. It's weird. The $1,099 version has a Snapdragon X chip, but 32 gigs of RAM. But the $899 version, which is one I'll be personally reviewing, has 16 gigs of RAM, but has a Snapdragon X Plus chip. So
that's so strange.
Yeah, the $899 version has a slightly more powerful CPU than the $1,000 version or $1,100 version. Not a huge difference. It's like 200 megahertz, and then I think a boost core or something like that. It's not a huge difference, but it is interesting. But that one, the $899 one, comes out around March time, so you may want to wait for that.
I do want to mention the ZenBook A14 rollout is strange. In the US, you can only get it with up to an X Plus, as Dan just mentioned, for apparently cheaper than the Snapdragon X. Elsewhere, outside the US, you can get it with an X Elite and an OLED screen, which won't be available in the US. That's very strange.
That's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Because like the $899 version, I think, is just the reason why I gave it the award was just because it's such a good laptop that like I'm really looking forward to just using it as my regular one for a while. But it's like a little bit over a full HD, like full HD plus display, but it's OLED and like very good, but it's only 60 hertz, right? And like you and I are like, so there's a version that's going to have an X Elite chip in it and a higher res, like 2.8K display, I think it is, but it's 120 hertz refresh rate, right? So they kind of scale up the real bonus features, which, makes that laptop even cooler. And I think that one is like $13.99. It's not like absurdly like more expensive or something like that. Asus is a strange company, but if people buy it and demand it, I'm sure they'll try to bring that higher SKU over. But that's a cool laptop to look out for.
Yeah.
So.
The laptop I'm most excited for right now, I think, is the Lenovo Yoga Slim 9 Gen 10. Yeah, with the camera under the display and stuff.
98% screen to body ratio.
Cool. And it's like a super high, it's almost like 4K resolution screen. It's like OLED, 120
OLED.
Hertz, bright.
Yeah, and it doesn't have like a big notch on it because they put for the first time, they put the webcam below the display.
Yeah. And it's got like a glass lid, right? Like the actual lid of it's glass.
Yes, it's a glass. It's very, it's called like a tiger's eye or something. It's very, I don't want to say sparkly, but it's very shiny. It's beautiful looking. That device is so thin, so slick. It's definitely the tiniest 14-inch I've ever seen.
Has to be.
But in a good way. You don't feel cramped on the keyboard. It's still got a full-size keyboard, a massive touchpad, and everything. That is an Intel-based device, so that's running Lunar Lake, but should get pretty solid battery life on it. I'll be reviewing the Yoga version of it, the 2-in-1 that has a speaker bar, which is still one of my favorite laptops. I think that's still one of the best overall laptops you can buy, period. But Zachary will be reviewing the Slim.
He beat you to it.
little Dallas, yeah. Well, it was funny too because they were like called dibs on that, and I'm like, but I'm getting the ZenBook A14. And it was like, okay, so fair is fair. But then it turns out there's two ZenBook A14s, and so they're getting the other one with the X chip, and I'm getting the one with the X Plus chip. So like, I got screwed out of this.
Hey, you got more CPU power, so.
Yeah, it's true. So, anyways, we should be getting a lot more of these the CES laptops in the coming weeks. They're about to start shipping, so look forward to our reviews. We're about to get our review for the new Lenovo Legion Go S, which is their handheld gaming system, which doesn't have detachable controllers anymore. It's a solid piece. They still have a Legion Go 2, the bigger version, with that, but this is a smaller version. So look for that review. We just did post our Samsung Galaxy Book Pro 5, Galaxy Book 5 Pro.
Yep, that's it.
Yeah, review. It's a 16-inch laptop, Intel Lunar Lake. So that review went up. If you want to go check it out, we gave it a very high score. I didn't do that one. That was Rebecca Spear. She reviewed it. Said it was an excellent one. Also has a number pad if you're into them things on laptops. But yeah, we have a bunch of that stuff coming out soon. So it should be a pretty exciting couple of weeks. So, what about you? You got a couple reviews coming out too, right? Mini PCs.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I'm using a Beelink PC currently. This is the Beelink GTI 13. It has an Intel Core i9 13900HX in it. But what's unique about this one is that you can also buy a dock separately, which has a PCI sort of thing on it, and the mini PC itself has a PCI slot, so you can slot it into the dock, and then you can plug in any GPU you like. 5090, bang on with a mini PC. It's pretty awesome. If you're somebody who's been looking for something modular like that with a GPU that you can swap out and change, this is a great choice. I mean, I've been dailying it for about a week now, and I love it. It has a built-in fingerprint reader, so you can just press the power button to log in if you don't have an external Hello webcam to do that, which is really nice.
That's really nice.
And yeah, it's super powerful, super fast SSD in it, 1 terabyte storage. You can actually configure it with even more RAM. So mine's got 32 gigs of RAM. You can get it with, I think, up to 96 gigs of RAM if you so want to do that. Then I'm also reviewing a Think Center all-in-one from Lenovo. It's a very business-focused device, so we probably won't talk about it on the podcast. I can only describe it as, this is the sort of computer a receptionist would use.
Sure.
Which is really interesting. I have actually enjoyed my time with it. It's an Intel 14th Gen i7, 32 gigs of RAM. Obviously, no dedicated graphics. I think it's Intel UHD, but it has a built-in webcam and a 1080p screen. But it's actually really quite nice. I mean, if you're an enterprise looking for a PC for the receptionist desk, then that's definitely one to get. But yeah, I think I'm going to be reviewing the Lenovo Qualcomm PCs, right? Or one of them at some point, whenever we get them in. But that will be on my list as well in the coming weeks.
Do you think we'll ever see like wireless keyboards or even just plug-in keyboards that have a fingerprint reader built in for desktop?
Surface had one, didn't they? Surface, for a very brief period of time, had a desktop keyboard that had a fingerprint reader, which was wireless. You could use it with Bluetooth. I've got one in there somewhere, but that's the only one I've ever seen. And
I don't know why that's not a thing.
I don't know either. You're totally right. It's very strange because all of the mini PCs I've seen with fingerprint readers have them on the actual box, which is a bit annoying because my desk's quite deep. I have to lean forward to actually press it. It's really annoying.
Right.
If they just bundled a keyboard, or if you could buy a keyboard separately, rather. Oh, I guess Apple's keyboards do it, but I suppose they don't work with Windows.
Right. Yeah, probably not.
That's,
so,
very
I don't
strange.
know. Maybe
there's a market there for that.
Yeah, definitely. So I was asking, I get the chicken egg argument for AI PCs, but I really don't want to invest in something that I have no idea will be useful later. So I will look at the NPU as definitely as just a bonus, as you mentioned later. So maybe the NPU is just a bonus. It is just a bonus. You're not really paying extra for it. In fact, I would argue that Qualcomm Snapdragon PCs are cheaper than Intel and AMD ones, and you're getting the powerful NPU and 16 gigs of RAM a lot of times, right? So I just look at it as a bonus. That said, at the very least, the biggest benefit of an NPU right now is if you do video calls. The ability to do background blur, eye fix correction, so it looks like you're looking at the camera. It can also do like a spotlight feature and do better lighting. All that relies on the NPU, and it's two things about it. One is it saves tremendous amount of battery life compared to using either the GPU or CPU on your system, and it's also way better. It's buttery smooth when you use the NPU for those versus a CPU GPU tends to kind of stutter. Not to mention, you're going to use the CPU GPU for like your browser, or if you're using the Teams app, like that's going to be what should be using that stuff, or any other apps you're using, including Office, right? So that it bogs down the CPU when you're using that. But if you're using a video, the NPU for the video call, your CPU, GPU are freed up to just use those apps as you want, and makes a big difference there. So at the very least, you're going to get that, and also some generative stuff here and there built into Windows. But I would definitely look at NPUs as just a bonus. I don't see how anyone is charging necessarily more for the NPU. It's just like Intel and I believe AMD don't have NPUs on some of their lower SKU chips yet. I think they'll get there, but Qualcomm already is, and so that's how I would look at it. Anyway, we'll kind of go over now to the audience questions. So, of course, we're listening. If you're listening to this recorded, you don't get to hear that, but you can join us on our podcast, which should be every Thursdays, 2 p.m. Eastern time on our YouTube channel. Otherwise, you can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Daniel_Rubino on Twitter, and just at Daniel Rubino on Blue Sky. Same thing with Zac, Zacbowden. We do answer questions there as well, so tag us up. I don't use social networks as much as I used to, so I'm kind of quiet on those things these days, so apologies. I try to share where I can, but I don't know, I'm just kind of burnt out on that stuff. That said, I still do check when people message me. So, if you have a question, just send it over. Otherwise, thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. Take care, everyone.
Wonderful. Zac, why don't we have recall on Canary? What's up with the channels? Yeah, it's really frustrating. I think it's because I don't know. I think maybe Canary and Dev are about to sort of become one and begin testing the Selenium branch, which will, to my knowledge, have recall in it. And so Canary will get it when that happens. But yeah, it's odd that the pre-release branch doesn't have it. I don't know why they've made that choice. I think it's because the way the builds compile internally and the hierarchy of the different branches means that there's probably some stuff that they don't want people seeing that would technically get compiled into the pre-release branch if they allowed recall and stuff to be compiled into it, that people would be able to discover through feature IDs and reading strings and stuff. And so I think that's why it's not there. But I don't know. It's a mystery. If there are any questions in the chat, now's the time to put them in. If there are none, we will leave. So, put them in.
Yeah, I'm going to go troubleshoot my internet. I think my upload speeds are bad because I keep getting stuttering on video calls, which is really annoying.
Yeah. Gustav says just Microsoft things. Yep, definitely. Does Microsoft even know why it's not here is the real question. Yeah, they might not even realize. Somebody should alert them. At them on Twitter.
Well, it's like the thing with Phone Link, right? You can add PCs, but there's no easy way to remove them. Like they forgot to.
So annoying, by the way, that they haven't added an option to delete phones you've added to Phone Link. How did that? How did they
I think they
that?
did have it. I think that's the thing.
Away?
I think they did.
That's crazy.
And they took it away.
That's actually crazy.
Yeah.
When will the clipboard function work smoothly among Android/iPhone and PC? It works okay for me. Like, are you talking about when you copy something on the PC, you can just paste it straight on the phone, or vice versa? That works fine for me. Or are you talking about the actual clipboard? In which case, doesn't that only work with SwiftKey? I thought you could only sync your clipboard between Windows and SwiftKey. Do you think the Xbox updates coming to Windows is the most exciting Windows features coming this year? And not for me. I'm not really much of a PC gamer, so I'm not too bothered. I can see why it would be interesting to people who do use Windows for PC gaming, though, because obviously it means ideally you're going to get a dedicated Windows shell, or at the very least Windows UI that runs on top of the existing Windows shell that will be more accustomed to either small screens such as the handhelds or controller, which will be very handy. But yeah, what's more interesting to me is how Xbox is planning to turn themselves into a ecosystem platform versus what they are now, which is basically you can only get Xbox on an Xbox console and then everything else is cloud streaming. If they make it so that Lenovo and Dell and others can build Xbox devices running the Windows flavor of Xbox, then, or the Xbox flavor of Windows, I guess would be more accurate there, then that's more interesting to me. But yeah, as it stands on its own, I'm not too interested in gaming on Windows because I'm not a PC gamer. I am an Xbox console gamer. Any info on Windows 12? No. Probably not this year. Probably, well, I'd say probably not this. I think it's unlikely that we'll see a Windows 12 this year, given Windows 10 end of support. It would just muddle the confusion and the communication from Microsoft, which is get upgraded to Windows 11. That message becomes really confusing if Microsoft introduces Windows 12 in July. It's like, come on. The whole idea is people getting off Windows 11 onto Windows 10 onto Windows 11. Introducing a new version into the mix is going to confuse things even further, especially if it has an even higher system requirements than Windows 11 does, which I think would probably be likely. So not this year. I think once Windows 10 support is done, then the question of when Windows 12 becomes a lot more feasible.
All right. I think that's about it.
Yeah. Okay, everybody, thank you for tuning in. We'll be back next Thursday. Follow us on Twitter. We keep you updated when we go live. But until then, we shall see you next time. Bye-bye.